From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
Donald Trump makes his return to Washington, meeting with President Biden at the White House and with House Republicans who today codified their majority. We're joined by Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York.
And more on the transition. Donald Trump today nominating Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General and Senator Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. This after making official his appointment of Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to lead a new Department of Government Efficiency. Alongside, Vivek Ramaswamy will review with our political panel.
And we'll talk with former NATO ambassador and former Republican Senator Bailey Hutchison about Donald Trump's foreign policy team and what it will mean for geopolitics in the new year. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday edition of Balance of Power. It certainly has been a busy day in Washington, Joe. Headlined, of course, by the meeting between the president and president-elect Biden and Trump together in the Oval Office.
Yeah, quite a moment. A lot different than what we saw 4 years ago, and that meeting did not take place today. Joe Biden clearly concerned with continuity of government. He talked about the peaceful transition of power. I'd love to know what they said after reporters left the room.
Well, all we know is what they said when reporters were in the room. Here's a taste.
Well, Mr. President-elect and former President, thank you. Donald, congratulations. Thank you. And looking forward to having like we said, a smooth transition. Do everything we can to make sure you're accommodated, what you need. And we're going to get a chance to talk about some of that today. So
good.
Welcome
Thank you
back.
very much. And thank you very much. And politics is tough, and it's many cases not a very nice world, but it is a nice world today, and I appreciate it very much. A transition that's so smooth, it'll be as smooth as it can get, and I very much appreciate that, Joe.
You're welcome.
And with that transition so smooth, we bring you to the White House. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is on the North Lawn. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe. President Biden and President-elect Donald Trump speaking for nearly 2 hours behind closed doors here at the White House. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre coming out, calling the meeting, quote, substantive, saying that the pair spoke about national security, domestic policy issues, as well as a to-do list for Congress, including averting a government shutdown when funding runs out on December 20th and passing some supplemental disaster relief aid for Americans. Now, she also honed in on this idea that the meeting was largely symbolic, right, to ensure this peaceful transfer of power that you heard them both speak about there. As you mentioned, important to note that then President Trump did not extend this same tradition to then President-elect Biden 4 years ago, but both of them pledging today to make this transition as smooth as possible. Now, when we talk about the transition, that often means the transition of personnel, and we got some new nominations today from President-elect Trump. That includes for Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the ranking member on Senate Intelligence, and what appears to be a bid by Trump to kind of shore up his foreign policy around China, since Senator Rubio is considered to be one of the more hawkish picks when it comes to that choice. Also, two surprise picks today. That includes former Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, who left her party. She's up for Director of National Intelligence. And then former Congressman and then current Congressman Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. Of course, he's been investigated by the very Department of Justice that an Attorney General would be tasked with running. Bloomberg News reporting that there is wide concern and questions from both sides of the aisle when it does come to this potential nomination, and whether or not that will be an uphill battle when he does go up for a confirmation hearing on the Senate. It also could be one of the first tests of the newly elected Republican leader, Senator John Thune, who just today spoke with Trump on the phone after he won his election and pledged to help get through all of his nominations. Joe and Kaylee, this one could be the exception.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, thank you so much. Tyler leading us right to the reaction pouring in from Congress over Trump's nomination of Congressman Gaetz for Attorney General. Moderate Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska told our colleague Stephen Dennis that Gaetz is not a serious candidate. And Steve is joining us now live from Capitol Hill. What else have you heard, Steve?
Yeah, I think he's going to have a really hard time getting confirmed. There's not going to be any Democratic support. They're laughing about this pick to us in the hallways. they're kind of shocked. And then Susan Collins of Maine, a fellow moderate with Lisa Murkowski, also said she was shocked. And she pointed out that he is under investigation right now by the House Ethics Committee. She pointed out the importance of the Senate process, including an FBI background check into Gaetz would be important. And then she expects a lot of tough questions in his confirmation hearing. Lindsey Graham, another Trump ally, said the confirmation hearing would be very important as well, and said he'd let us know how that goes. I mean, I do think this is going to be very tough to imagine that there's going to be 51 votes here. Keep in mind they have a narrow majority. It's 53-47. We have the rule of 4. Any 4 Republicans defect and vote with the Democrats, and you can't get somebody confirmed. But keep in mind, Trump has said he wants to be able to do recess appointments to bypass the Senate, in which case Gaetz could be a recess appointed sort of temporary.
So how likely is a recess appointment in that world, Stephen? Because I'm thinking back to John Tower, 1989, actually voted down in a confirmation hearing, nominated for Secretary of Defense. We don't see that anymore. You're supposed to withdraw, right? Submit your resignation or your withdrawal letter. What's more likely in this case?
You know, it's really hard to tell. You know, Matt Gaetz is sort of a bomb thrower and social media personality and well known to President Trump's base. And I think that they're excited about this pick. But, you know, you've got a lot of senators who probably don't want to have to cast a vote one way or the other. And it'll be interesting to see if some horse trading happens over this pick or the Tulsi Gabbard pick. I think she's also going to have a hard time because she's harshly criticized senators in both parties for being neocon warmongers, is her language, and one of those senators was Marco Rubio. So it's going to be interesting to see how they all get along.
Marco Rubio made official nominee for Secretary of State. Bloomberg Stephen Dennis with us from Capitol Hill. Thank you for the great reporting today, Stephen, as we turn to our other major story, of course, and that is the economy. Core CPI coming in, according to projections, rising 0.3% for the third month in a row, with shelter costs making up more than half the monthly advance, according to the BLS. Minneapolis Fed President offering reaction to the report on Bloomberg TV this morning.
I think that inflation is headed in the right direction. I've got confidence about that, but we need to wait. We've got another month or 6 weeks of data to analyze before we make any decisions.
Neil Kashkari talking there, and joining us now is Bloomberg's Kate Davidson at the table. Kate, you get the drama-free part of the program here tonight. With everything going on in the world of politics, it's easy to miss some pretty important data today. What does it tell us about the trajectory for inflation and plans by the Fed?
Sure. Remember the days when CPI, the monthly CPI,
should be our top story.
Biggest news of the month. But yeah, that's right. I mean, it's become, one of the, dare I say, less important releases. Jobs Day. There's a big focus on that. But we learned today that inflation. It was an important reminder that it's on a bumpy path. We've heard Fed officials say that a lot this year. In this report, kind of reinforced that. It basically showed that price growth has been moving sideways since about July or August. That's what those numbers suggested. It was interesting to us, those of us on the Fed team that follow policymakers, listening to Neil Kashkari on BTV this morning saying that it seemed like he wasn't too worried about it. I think that officials are going to be paying close attention to other inflation data. They really look more carefully at the personal consumption expenditures index. That's their preferred measure to see what happens there. I think another surprising pop in inflation could make them a bit more nervous about cutting rates again in December.
All right. Well, as we consider we have more data still to come, tomorrow we get producer price inflation, then we're going to get retail sales as well. So this is not the only data point they will be considering as they head toward that December meeting. Exactly. And that was the point, again, that Neil Kashkari made. There's a lot of time between now and that December meeting. It's the week before Christmas. They'll get another jobs report. They'll get a couple inflation reports. So I think broadly speaking, what we heard from Chair Jay Powell last week, and we'll hear from him again tomorrow, is that the economy is on pretty solid footing. The concern is just, what are we seeing, again, that continuous kind of slog, slow disinflation process, and it's just going to take a long time, or are we seeing some kind of pickup and some kind of acceleration? Markets, it was interesting, they seemed to think that it supported a rate cut in December. I think they were bracing for something much worse, certainly worse than what economists were expecting. This, as you said, was right in line with what they were expecting. All right, Bloomberg's Kate Davidson, thank you so much for joining us. And coming up, we'll have a conversation with Bailey Hutchison, the former Texas senator and NATO ambassador, on the new era of leadership on Capitol Hill. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons on the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power as we follow the bouncing ball on the transition here. The Trump team rolling out more names today when it comes to the Secretary of State making this official. Now it will be Senator Marco Rubio, the Republican from Florida. As we turn now to Bailey Hutchison, a conversation that we've been looking forward to with our eyes on geopolitics, former Republican Senator of Texas and former U.S. Ambassador to NATO. Madam Ambassador, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. There are a lot of questions as we assemble the foreign policy team here, knowing that we still have confirmations to go through with Senator Marco Rubio running the State Department. And we filled in a couple of other blanks today as well that we can talk about. John Ratcliffe to head the CIA, Tulsi Gabbard, DNI. Does this sound like a group that will make the world safer or more dangerous?
I do think so. I think that it is certainly a group that has had experience both in Congress and in international travel and international affairs. I know Marco Rubio, of course. I served with him, and I think that his Intel, he's been ranking member on Intel Committee, so he knows a lot about what's going on and some of our adversaries' actions. I know John as well, Ratcliffe, and he is a wonderful former congressman and very, very competent in the Intel area on the House side. He also was U.S. Attorney here in Texas. So, yes, I don't know Tulsi, but I do think that this is a good beginning, and I think they understand the importance of alliances and keeping our word. And I think their mantra is what I think will be the mantra of the administration, and that is you want your allies to trust you and you want your adversaries to fear you. And I think that we are certainly turning a page and going forward probably with that kind of a mantra.
Well, from specifically your perch as the former ambassador to NATO, if we zero in on Marco Rubio, it strikes me that you could see some of the comments he has made about Ukraine and the wider European region as conflicting, as he suggests that there does need to be an end to the war in Ukraine, but also has expressed support of NATO and our allies. How do you expect him to actually toe that line? Do you think he would advocate for further support for Ukraine as Secretary of State?
It's hard to tell what the negotiations are going to be, but he has voted for the extended support of Ukraine and understanding that giving money to help the Ukrainians fight for themselves and not having American troops on the ground is a very important element of this. While the Ukrainians are fighting for their own sovereign country, we don't have troops on the ground. And I think the price is very well worthwhile to America to help Ukraine win. And I hope that this administration will allow Ukraine much more capability to take out the drones and the missile ranges that Russia is lobbying from Russia. But so far, the present administration has not allowed Ukraine to hit those targets and take out those missile bases. And I think that will be something that hopefully we will see change to give Ukraine a really better capability to win this war.
Ambassador, I want to ask you about the future of the Pentagon as the president-elect nominates Pete Hegseth, the Fox News host, a combat veteran, to run the agency, who apparently is prepared to clean house if he's confirmed. Earlier this month on the Sean Ryan show, Mr. Hegseth talked about the list of folks he'd be looking at as part of a restructuring. Let's listen.
First of all, you got to fire, you got to fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and you got to fire this. I mean, obviously, you're going to bring in a new Secretary of Defense, but any general that was involved, general, admiral, whatever that was involved in any of the DEI woke, it's got to go. Either you're in for war fighting, and that's it. And that's the only litmus test we care about.
Ambassador, I guess we should take him at his word, and I'm wondering what you think that means for the future of the Department of Defense and whether the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General C.Q. Brown, should start polishing his resume.
Well, I certainly think that when Pete was being interviewed, he was in a very different position. So he will now be working with the administration, who will make the decisions. Yeah.
And it was published just last week, though, Ambassador.
Well, I know, but I think that it is very important. I mean, the president has the right to select his own chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and I think that will be something that will be looked at, and I think Pete will be looking at it through the eyes of the warriors. And I think a lot of people have been concerned that we are doing a lot in the military that is not relevant to training warriors. And I think Pete has said that over and over again. And I think there is a concern there that we want our warriors to be trained well and to be judged on merit, to be able to go into a battle and know that they're going to have the assets to win. And that should be the only concern of our military. And I think that's what I think the president has also said as he has campaigned.
Well, of course, he will need to face Senate confirmation for this post, as will Senator Rubio and every other member of the cabinet. And so I would like to talk about the new composition in the Senate, going to be a Republican majority. And we learned today a majority led by Senator John Thune of South Dakota, who beat Senator John Cornyn of Texas and the MAGA favorite, it seemed, Florida Senator Rick Scott for the position. I wonder what your reaction to that is.
Well, I think it was a very close race. I mean, I think it's been publicly said that it was 28-24 when it got down to 2. So both John Thune and John Cornyn are well regarded by their colleagues. That was a tough vote for all of them. And I think Rick Scott played an important part, because I think there has been a concern among some of the senators about their ability to have more floor access and amendment access. And I'm working with a group of former senators, bipartisan, to look at the Senate rules to see if there is a way to make sure that we have the capability for every senator to make the contribution that they were sent to the Senate to make. And so I think Rick Scott presented that. I do believe that both John Thune and John Cornyn have great respect within the conference, and they will be taking on together, John Thune as the leader, and I think John Cornyn will be also a leader that's out there in the field working to make sure that all of the senators stay together, work together, and have a working relationship with Democrats as well, to do the things that President Trump campaigned that he wanted to do. They're going to try to keep taxes low, to try to lower the regulation level, make a pro-business U.S. Policy that would encourage more jobs to be created, more manufacturing in our country. I think you will find bipartisan support for that. And I think that John Thune will be able to lead, and I think the others will be willing to participate when they have a good, united conference, and then work bipartisan where they can.
All right, Bailey Hutchison, former Republican senator from Texas and former U.S. ambassador to NATO. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, we'll take a closer look at Trump's pick for Attorney General, Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida. We'll have reaction from Dave Aronberg, the Palm Beach County State Attorney, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Earlier this afternoon, Donald Trump announced his pick for Attorney General, Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida. And joining us now with a closer look at the choice is Dave Aronberg, Palm Beach County State Attorney. Thanks so much for joining us, Dave. Whatever one may think of Matt Gaetz politically, what about the actual qualifications for the job? He is a William and Mary educated lawyer. He graduated from law school. He has served on the House Judiciary Committee. So can he do the job?
Depends on your expectations. We're in the year 2024. Normally, someone like this would not be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Normally, someone would not be nominated for this position. But here we are. It's about retribution. And Donald Trump said, I will be a retribution. And this is why he's appointing Matt Gaetz, because if there's anyone who hates the Department of Justice more than Donald Trump, it's perhaps Matt Gaetz. As far as qualifications, no one would be appointed with his qualifications to this position, except for the fact that this is not about qualifications. It's about retribution.
Well, as you sit there talking to us with your state's attorney pinned on your lapel, Dave Aronberg, describe, if he were confirmed, what it would mean for the legal system.
You would hope that there'd be enough career prosecutors there to limit the damage. Now, there are some guardrails that are built into the criminal justice process. For those who think he's just going to go after all of his and Trump's enemies, going to prosecute Jack Smith and everyone else, the process prevents that, the built-in guardrails. Remember when John Durham was going after individuals because of the origins of the Russia investigation? Well, he fell on his face. He prosecuted 2 people for minor crimes, and then he lost both at trial, embarrassed. And that is the future if they go after political enemies. You have to have evidence to even get to a jury. A judge could just throw it out, and then a jury will laugh you out of court. And if you go too far, like Mike Nifong, the Duke lacrosse prosecutor, you could be disbarred, even put in jail. So you got to be really careful as a prosecutor before you just go after your enemies. You have to follow the evidence and the law, although their standards for prosecution perhaps will be a little different. Still, like I said, there are some built-in guardrails. So I think that it will be a tough time for the rule of law, but I'm hopeful that it won't be a complete destruction of the rule of law.
Well, as we consider the future of the Department of Justice here, the Department of Justice has already had business with Congressman Gaetz. He was under investigation around sex trafficking and allegations that he had sex with a minor. He was never charged. There was some civil litigation as well. But is there anything outstanding we should be aware of that he would then have the ability to completely clear if he took over the Department of Justice?
He was pretty much not cleared by the Department of Justice, but told he will not be prosecuted because the investigation of Matt Gaetz for alleged sex trafficking and other crimes did not go to the indictment phase because the 2 key witnesses, Joel Greenberg and the alleged victim, the underage girl, were not credible enough witnesses for the Department of Justice. So they tried to find another witness, Matt Gaetz's ex-girlfriend, who had no axe to grind, who had credibility. She was given immunity before a grand jury, and apparently she did not give up the ghost. She perhaps implicated Matt Gaetz in witness tampering, but that's not going to be enough for the Department of Justice to take down a MAGA warrior. You have to have an underlying crime. What's the underlying crime? And they didn't think they had the goods. Joel Greenberg is a walking criminal enterprise. He has no credibility. So Gaetz was able to avoid those charges, but he did face expulsion in the House. And if he remained in the House, I think he would end up like George Santos because he upset not just Democrats, but Republicans. Kevin McCarthy, remember, he's the reason why Kevin McCarthy was ousted. And so as Kevin McCarthy's revenge, they were going to expel him, in my mind, from the House for all these same reasons as his DOJ investigation. Well, this preempts that if he becomes Attorney General because he's not going to be in the House any longer.
Yeah, I do wonder what Kevin McCarthy is thinking today at the emergence of this headline. Look, there's an active House ethics investigation underway into Matt Gaetz. Dave, we understand there are a couple of dozen subpoenas outstanding. Is there going to be a massive oppo dump ahead of this confirmation hearing?
Yeah, Kevin McCarthy is a powerful dude, even though he's no longer Speaker. And that is a Republican ethics committee doing this. And you know what Matt Gaetz called the Republicans who are investigating him? He called them Soviets. So if you wonder if there's any love lost between him and leaders of the Republican Party, there's not. And that's why I really do think, Joe, there's a decent chance he is not confirmed in the Senate. Already one U.S. Senator, Mullins from Oklahoma, Republican, conservative, has publicly blasted Gaetz prior to this. And there's a silence here. You don't hear people coming out in support of this nomination. And I think that silence is deafening. And you know what Kevin McCarthy's doing right now? He's probably working the phones to try to get every last vote he can to torpedo this nomination in the Senate.
Well, I guess we're all going to find out whether or not that happens. Could I also ask you, Dave, quickly, a separate piece of news? We understand that the special counsel who brought charges, federal charges against Donald Trump here in Washington as it pertained to the 2020 election subversion and also down in Florida in the documents case, he now apparently is going to retire before Donald Trump can come into the office, and presumably whoever his attorney general will be, if it's Matt Gaetz or someone else, takes hold. And I wonder what your reaction is to that decision.
It's what I expected. He knew he would be fired, and the best he can do now is to issue his report to the attorney general and let that go public. The longer he waits on that, the more it will be suppressed. So if he gets this out before January 20th, the public will see what he knows, and that could be powerful. But if he waited and filled out his term and then submitted the report to the next attorney general, that report would be in the circular filing cabinet, meaning the trash, because it would never see the light of day. So Jack Smith's revenge and all this will be a report for the public to see, just like the Mueller report, and you see what that did to Trump. Not much.
It's great to have you today, Dave. He's Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Aronberg with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. We thank you. And we'll let you know, of course, what happens with the entire confirmation process for all of Donald Trump's nominees. Earlier today, Rachel Reeves, UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, spoke with Bloomberg, talked about Donald Trump's tariff proposal and legislating pension funds in the UK. Here's part of that conversation.
I think it would be wrong to speculate what an incoming US administration would do. But we benefit, and so does the United States, from trade worth more than £300 billion a year. That trade is growing, and it's important for the prosperity of both the United Kingdom and the United States. And we'll continue to make representations for free and open trade that benefits both of our nations.
OK, let's turn to your Mansion House speech. When it comes to harnessing pension money to boost growth, what are you going to offer in terms of reform that your Conservative predecessors didn't?
What we don't have in the UK is mega pension funds. We don't have those economies of scale in our pension funds, which is why the interim report that we're publishing looks at having a minimum size of 25 or 50 billion pounds, similar to what you have in Canada and the United States. Those sorts of mega funds will have the expertise to make those investments, both in start-up and scale-up businesses and in British infrastructure.
What's different to what Jeremy Hunt did? Because he just finished this consultation into consolidating the local government pension scheme. It made these exact points. Do you really need another consultation?
Well, the difference between what we're doing and what the previous government did is that we're going to legislate. And the previous government didn't have a pensions bill for around 5 years. We have a slot in the King's Speech for a pensions bill in this session of Parliament. We'll be introducing legislation in the spring so that we don't just talk about consolidation in the pension industry. Anyone can do that, but we actually make sure that it happens. That's the difference between this government and the previous government. We're getting on and doing the job.
You can find the full conversation with Rachel Reeves, UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, online or on the terminal. Coming up, we'll take a closer look at some of President-elect Trump's cabinet picks, including his choice of Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz for Attorney General and Florida Senator Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. Our political panel will weigh in next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington alongside Kaylee Lyons. Thanks for joining us with reaction flowing in on President-elect Trump's choice of Matt Gaetz, the Florida congressman, for Attorney General. Joining us now is our political panel. I suspect they have feelings on this. Christy Setzer, president, founder of New Heights Communications, Democratic strategist, is with us alongside Chapin Fay, Republican strategist and founder of Lighthouse Public Affairs. Great to see you both here and welcome. Chapin, I'll start with you as our Republican. You can weigh in on the veracity of this pick. It seemed to blow a lot of minds in Washington. Does he stand a chance of being confirmed?
Well, I think that's we're going to find out, and I think there will be a fight about him. But I don't think you can accuse President Trump of not being bold in his second term. It was certainly a bold pick, and I think what you have in Congressman Gaetz is a disruptor and a kindred spirit with a president who feels he's been prosecuted and persecuted more than any other politician and is still standing and still winning. And I think Congressman Gaetz and President Trump share that kindred spirit. And if you're looking to disrupt government, if you're looking to take the Department of Justice on a different path, I think you're going to get that from Congressman Matt Gaetz.
Well, as you talk about kindred spirits, they've both been investigated by the Department of Justice. They just only had one of them actually facing charges. That would be Donald Trump. Matt Gaetz was never charged, actually, with sex trafficking or having sex with a minor. But the fact that those very allegations are out there, that he is currently, Chapin, under a House ethics investigation, knowing that we've seen some pretty scathing ethics investigations for the likes of George Santos, for example, in this Congress, are there not better choices out there for AG?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily put Matt Gaetz and George Santos in the same category, but, to your point.
But they both raise ethics questions, is my point.
Yes, and I think you'll find a lot of members of Congress are currently or have been investigated by the Ethics Committee. But to your point, there's no question this is not going to be necessarily the smoothest of confirmations. But again, this is someone who is going to adhere very loyally to executing the Trump agenda, particularly around the Department of Justice, which many of those on the right, beyond just President Trump and Matt Gaetz and their supporters, think has been way too weaponized and politicized. Now, will they take it too far? Will the pendulum swing too far the other way? Perhaps, but there's no question Donald Trump was elected with a mandate, particularly from his supporters, to take a wrecking ball to government. And I don't think there's a bigger wrecking ball for the Department of Justice than Matt Gaetz.
Huh. That seems to be true. Christy Setzer, you're the Democrat on this panel. Take it away.
In some ways, the nominations that Donald Trump has put forward at this point have fallen into two different categories. There's ones where I, as a Democrat, am disappointed by them, but frankly, they're pretty establishment Republican picks, like Marco Rubio, of course. And then there are these hair on fire, out of your mind, insane picks like Matt Gaetz as AG, Pete Hegseth as Department of Defense, or even today with Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence. Some say that she is a Russian asset. Putting her in charge of our national intelligence is certainly a choice, right? So I think what's going to happen for Democrats and frankly Republicans is that they're going to have to pick their battles. I would say that we probably get to only torpedo a couple of these nominations. So we need to figure out where to, to put our firepower. Is it on Matt and Tulsi? Is it on Pete? And, right? But that is the conversation that they need to figure out right now.
Do you have a way you're leaning on that, though, Christy? I mean, who is the most problematic name we have had named so far?
I was going to say it's possible that we haven't heard the most problematic name yet. Right?
We're not done yet. That's a fair point.
We're definitely still working on it. But I mean, I would say, look, that even though I myself am someone who's typically been more interested in domestic politics, I think that some of the most problematic ones have come up on more of the foreign policy front, right? I think that, again, the idea of potentially giving our national secrets to Russia is most prominent in someone like Tulsi Gabbard. So I think those are probably the ones where you could do the most damage and that we would have to really stand up against.
It's interesting because Donald Trump now can say, I would put a former Democrat in the White House. Chapin, the Hegseth idea, though, is an interesting one. Not only has he pledged to fire half the building, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and those who are responsible for what he calls woke policy tied to DEI. He also says that women should not be serving in combat. That would be a pretty major cultural shift at the Pentagon. Would it work?
Well, I think for the first part, let's break it into two parts, right? The woke part and fighting against it. And if you actually look at what Pete Hegseth has said, he's basically said the only requirement to work at the Defense Department for him would be war fighting, right? That's what the Defense Department does, protect America.
Unless you're a woman.
And war fighting. Right. Well, that's the second part of your question. I do think that will be a problematic policy. There are women who qualify to fight in combat, and they should be allowed to do so if they want to and they can qualify. But I think what he's talking about is if we're changing standards or if we're focusing on some of the more woke policies that these generals under the Biden administration have been talking about and recruiting over, I think going back to first principles, going back to basics, the Defense Department is about defending this nation, and everything in the Defense Department policy agenda should be about the best way to protect the nation, its soldiers, its people, and fight wars. And everything else is a distraction, and I think that's what Pete Hegseth brings to this. And again, it's similar to Matt Gaetz, someone who's going to be a disruptor in the way that Trump was elected to do. His supporters want this. I don't think there's anything very controversial among Trump's supporters and Republicans about Pete Hegseth. He has military experience, and he knows how to get things done, and that's all that's going to matter.
Well, as we consider Pete Hegseth is, of course, a Fox News host, he isn't necessarily sitting in the chambers of Congress right now. That isn't the case for a lot of the picks we're discussing, including with Matt Gaetz. It's another Congress person, a member of Congress that has been polled. We could be dealing with a very small majority here. The majority, of course, was just called by multiple networks today that Republicans will have control. It's just a question of the degree of control. Right. If you're now talking about three people that are going to need to have special elections to fill their seats, are we in for kind of a repeat of what we've been experiencing the last 2 years?
I think that's exactly right. It looks like right now that the majority is going to be, 2 or 3 seats, very, very small. And even though the majority of the people that have been nominated or even been in part of the conversation come from these very safe Republican districts where obviously you're going to be replacing a Republican with another Republican, there is that period of time before a new person is seated. And so, sure, you're going to have even harder job for Johnson right now in order to keep his caucus in order. So I think that's something that Democrats are going to have to be creative about, but have the potential to exploit.
You know, there's been a suggestion that there's some strategy here, Chapin, that Donald Trump reaches for Matt Gaetz to take the glare off of a Pete Hegseth or a Tulsi Gabbard, that maybe he doesn't think everybody is actually going to get confirmed here, and he gets the media all worked up. Everyone's head explodes in Washington. That sounds kind of like Donald Trump, doesn't it?
It sounds exactly like him, and it's something a lot of people in the media and on the left have never understood, that a lot of this is negotiating posture, right? A lot of what he says, a lot of the bluster is a negotiating process for him. And again, I think he wants Matt Gaetz as his attorney general, but, if he doesn't get him, maybe there's other people that, he has waiting in the wings, right? And this is a negotiating posture. So I think he achieves both things. It's a negotiating posture, and if he gets Gaetz, he's got his top choice. So it's a win-win situation for the president.
Well, as we consider the president-elect and the current president, they, of course, met at the White House today in the Oval Office. And the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, shared a little bit more about that meeting that took place between the two, though we still don't have a full readout.
Look, they met for more than 2 hours. They met for a very long time, or nearly 2 hours, pardon me. And I think by the length of the meeting tells you that they had an in-depth conversation on an array of issues. Look, the president reached out to the president-elect wanting to make sure that he gave an opportunity to the president-elect, afforded him that opportunity to have a meeting with him to talk about the different issues that matter to the American people.
So, Christy, still leaving a little bit to the imagination here as to what exactly happened in that closed-door meeting over the course of nearly 2 hours. But I wonder if really the point of the meeting was just that the meeting happened, that you show the democratic process is working, even though Joe Biden was extending this invitation to someone he described as a threat to our democratic institutions.
That's exactly what it was. I think of this as that meme with the dog with the flames around it where it says everything is fine. And that is what I think happened at the White House today. The fact that this meeting happened at all was a signal by Joe Biden to say this is fine. There's going to be a normal transition of power.
But isn't that contradicting what we heard him say for months, what we heard Harris say, that this is actually inherently not fine, and now he's singing a different tune?
Yeah, well, I don't know that he's singing a different tune. I think it's almost a little bit of wishful thinking and modeling for Donald Trump, right? Saying, see, I can do this. I know you didn't do it last time. And then I do think that there was a bit of a substantive part of the meeting, too, which is that even though I'm sure President Biden knows that Donald Trump is going to ignore 99% of what is said in that meeting, it is also a time for him to flag a really important message or potentially a really important threat, as Obama did when he met with Donald Trump. He said, don't hire Mike Flynn, right, which obviously he did. So it sounds as though in this meeting, again, there was not a full readout, but one thing that we did hear from Jake Sullivan was that they had a conversation about Ukraine and about the importance of standing up Ukraine. So I think that was, whether or not that was the most important thing that Joe Biden left him with, it was certainly an important thing.
Both talked about continuity of government, the transition Donald Trump said so smooth. Chapin, are you surprised neither took the opportunity to make a statement to the press about any of the stuff that we're talking about here, that Joe Biden didn't say something about preserving democracy, serving our allies, the fact that Donald Trump didn't go after some of the reporters in the room or make fun of Joe Biden's age? Have we all grown up?
I don't know about all that, Joe, but I'm not surprised that neither one took any shots. I'm not surprised President Trump, especially if President Biden, came and extended an olive branch himself. There's no reason for President Trump to come out swinging. And wouldn't you love to have been a fly on that wall in that particular room?
Yes, sir.
But I think you saw President Biden soften a little bit towards Trump. I know the right and Republican voters like to, harp on him putting on the hat and some of these little things, but I do think you saw a little bit of a softening from President Biden. What the reason is, we could speculate, but I think President Biden was looking for, a smooth transition, and that was President Trump was looking for, and they both seem to got what they wanted, and so they're not, throwing punches outside the meeting. And I think it's a good sign for both the outgoing and incoming administrations.
Well, I can attest there were hundreds of members of the press assembled outside the White House, hoping if they couldn't be a fly on the wall, that at the very least Donald Trump might come out and speak to them. But of course, we didn't get that either. What we did get, though, is a new Senate Majority Leader. The South Dakota Republican John Thune is elected to lead the upper chamber in the next Congress, at least the Republican wing of it. We'll get reactions from the panel on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I'm excited to get to work with this team right away, and I want to thank my colleagues who placed their faith in me to serve as leader, and to those who were supporting another candidate. I promise to be a leader who serves the entire Republican conference. We will have an ambitious agenda, and we'll take each and every Republican working together to be successful.
Republican Senator John Thune of South Dakota after being elected Majority Leader for the next Congress earlier today. Back with us now on Bloomberg TV and radio is our political panel, Christy Setzer and Chapin Fay. So, Chapin, John Thune it will be. He beat out, of course, another John, the senator from Texas, John Cornyn, as well as the pick that those close to Trump were pushing for. The senator from Florida, Rick Scott, was knocked out in the first ballot. And I wonder what that says to you about the first move MAGA was trying to make that didn't necessarily seem to land with roaring success.
Well, I think it's really a testament to the way the Senate works and secret ballots, right? When there's a secret ballot, it's very hard to get a sense of who is going to win before they come out of the meeting. I think, Senator Thune is already in leadership. He's well-liked. He's obviously capable. He's from a red state. He's conservative. But this is all going to be about executing the Trump agenda. The message voters sent on last Tuesday was that they gave President Trump a mandate to get his agenda executed. And if the more establishment side of the Senate Republicans starts to become powerful or starts wagging the dog themselves, you're going to see a lot of the gains that we made fizzle out, right? The Republicans need to work together nationally in all the branches of government to execute the Trump agenda. If you do not, it's at your own peril back in your home state, your home primary, and with Trump supporters across the nation and Republicans.
John Thune was not the preferred MAGA candidate. We know that. Rick Scott didn't get off the first ballot, make it past the first ballot, I should say. With that in mind, is John Thune the closest thing to a check on Donald Trump?
Yes, that is exactly right. This was a big win today for Team Normal. And, as you know, he was McConnell's number 2 for a long time. He saw how McConnell himself, not the biggest fan of Donald Trump, was able to keep his caucus in order. I think he probably learned a lot from him. And I would say that I think a lot of people kind of breathe a sigh of relief that there is somebody who is an establishment sort of in charge of the Republican wing in the Senate right now. The first big battle that I see coming up for him, though, is this Trump mandate on get my nominees through via recess appointments. I have to think that they're going to fight him hard on that, and that's just not going to happen. Finally, I guess I would just say that, again, there was not a ton of love lost between Donald Trump and John Thune. Thune came out and endorsed Tim Scott instead of Donald Trump. Donald Trump potentially, was going to endorse against John Thune, et cetera, all that. So we'll see.
Well, right now, the Senate majority, as we understand it, will be 53 after the race in Pennsylvania was called for the Republican Dave McCormick. But both Reuters and Fox now reporting that Pennsylvania's Senate race will be going to a recount, keeping in mind this was a margin of just tens of thousands of votes. Chapin, do you think there's a realistic chance the Senate majority is actually 52?
No, I think this is late games. This is what a close but losing candidate does. I think, all of the media outlets called it. There's just not enough, regardless of what Casey thinks, there's just not enough ballots out there. So they can recount it, but this is going to be highly watched. This is what makes both sides suspicious of outcomes. And I think you're going to see both sides watching this like a hawk, as well they should.
David McCormick is in Washington for Senate orientation as he's learning about this recount along with the rest of us. Is this a bad look for Bob Casey, or should he be going in this direction?
No, it's absolutely not a bad look for Bob Casey. He should make sure that all the votes are counted. And even if the pathway for him to actually win is narrow, why wouldn't he want us to actually count all those votes? I think it's perfectly reasonable, and to the point that this is what makes people suspicious or cynical. I mean, it's not as though there were 60-plus lawsuits after the 2020 election on behalf of Team Trump trying to contest that. It's not as though, we've spent the last 4 years talking about Donald Trump maintaining that he, in fact, actually won. So I don't think this is what makes people cynical.
I got it. Christy Setzer, Chapin Fay, great panel and a great conversation on an incredibly busy day, arguably an historic one here in the nation's capital. Thank you both for your insights and analysis, and you got a lot to catch up on. In the Washington Edition newsletter, you can find it on the terminal and online.
I can only imagine what tomorrow will bring.
God, how about Treasury?
Yeah, we got a lot of picks to get through, so we'll have more coverage back here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.